You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact.
I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and today I am so excited to welcome back a very special guest, Daniel Sih. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Heather. It's great to be back on this show.
Well, I would love for you to spend a few minutes introducing yourself to the audience, but before you do, for those of you who did not listen to our first episode or another episode where I referenced Daniel's work a lot, I'm going to put those in the show notes. But Daniel, you are one of the guests that I've had on that has had a significant impact on how I interact with technology, and that relationship that I have with technology, it has changed in a way that has changed so many different aspects of my life. So I just want to thank you for your work and the impact that it's had on me.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure, and it's a joy to be back. I love your show as well. So the compliment is likewise.
So why don't you tell people who you are and how you got into helping people make space for things that matter?
I know. It's a kind of a strange job, isn't it? Helping people make space. You know, it's kind of like selling the inside of the donut rather than the donut itself, you know. But so look, my accent's obviously Australian. So I live in Tasmania, which is a long way away from where you are. We're an island at the very bottom of Australia. Next stop would be Antarctica. So look, I began as a physiotherapist. That was my first career. I spent a decade in that, did management, leadership stuff. And basically I started to become really interested in how we work, why we do what we do, how does email shape our, day by day experiences of life, and basically why can't we concentrate and why are we struggling with our priorities? And I ended up through a set of random circumstances and, life choices, ended up becoming what I call a productivity consultant, which is a bit of a made-up term. You do a real degree like physiotherapy and everyone knows what that is, or physical therapist in the States. But yeah, productivity consultant. I help people think about how they live, how they want to be intentional, and how to make space for the things that truly matter. And I teach people practices and habits around that. But through that journey, a lot of it has ended up intersecting with digital technology, which is what a lot of my books are about. Because you can't make space to think or rest or plan or be intentional in how you live if you don't reshape and reimagine your relationship with the online world, which is where we've had a conversation in the past.
Yes, and I will make sure your books, again, life-changing, I'll make sure those links are in the show notes below. But you recently started a podcast, and I was so excited when this landed in my inbox. One of the first episodes that I listened to had to do with focus. And that's where we thought we'd start today's conversation, because everywhere I turn, it seems that people are having excuses for why they can't focus anymore. And you started, or somewhere early in the episode, you told a story about something that happened to you when you were having a conversation with your son's friend. And I thought it was so profound. I wanted to ask you to share it here.
Yeah, sure. And it really did begin the podcast. I mean, the podcast is called The Spacemakers, so we'll be talking about anything to do with making space in life. But the first season, the whole first season, like it's just 10 episodes, is about how to regain your attention and recapture that lost focus in a very practical way. So the whole season is about that. And it began with this conversation I had in a car with my son's friend. So my son is 14 years old. And I was driving him and his friend home to his friend's house, and it was about a 40-minute drive. So, what do you say to like 14-year-old boys when you're trying to have a conversation that isn't like a grunt? And so I simply said to my son's friend, what movies do you enjoy nowadays? Because I thought that's a pretty safe question. And he just said to me, look, I don't watch movies. And I'm like, okay, don't you like movies? And he said, it's not that I don't like them. He said, I just don't have the concentration to watch a whole movie anymore. And he just stopped. And I was, I'm driving going, a 14-year-old can't sit through an Avengers movie. That's really interesting. And so, I mean, this is my wheelhouse. This is my area of expertise. So I was like, tell me more about that. And he literally gave me the answer. He said, Well, I used to be able to enjoy movies, but ever since I've been using TikTok and watching YouTube shorts, I just don't have the ability to sit through a whole movie. Full stop, you know? And I pondered that. And since that time, I mean, I've spoken to so many parents because I have a tech parenting book as well. I've interviewed lots of different people. I speak with professional audiences, not just kids. And I ask professionals, okay, who here honestly can't watch a movie anymore without picking up their phone and, scrolling something, basically because it's hard to focus. And like 15% of the room, this is professional leaders and adults put their hand up, let alone teenagers. If you look at your teens, they can't watch a movie without pulling up their screens. And this is an indication that we have retrained our brain. We can talk about neuroplasticity, but we've retrained our brain to lose the ability to concentrate and to focus. We are using highly addictive tools, which are training us to actually no longer think in clear, formed ways. And that has a massive implication for, let's say, if you want to do a doctorate and you have to do deep work and you have to sustain a long-term goal and make progress, what you do with your brain and how you train it right now has a massive implication for whether you'll be able to achieve quality work, which is why I think there's a connection between these two conversations.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, I've been having trouble focusing, how would someone even start to tackle this problem of, I can't focus anymore? Why and where do I go from here?
Yeah. Well, look, first I would say it begins with awareness. I mean, obviously we can get to some habits and practices to retrain your brain, but I do think it starts with awareness. It starts with a recognition of what's happening and an understanding of why it's happening. Because if you don't understand that, well, then it's very hard to make changes. And the thing about our lost attention is it's an organic process that's happened inside of us. So Neil Postman, who wrote some amazing stuff in the 80s about television and how it's going to damage our brain, he talked about technology being ecological or organic, meaning when you engage regularly in a technological medium, it changes the way you think from the inside out. And therefore, you lose the ability to recognize that you're no longer thinking the way you used to. So you actually need to kind of step back out of yourself a bit and reflect on what you used to be like and what you're like now. For example, can you read a book now? How many pages can you read before your mind wanders and you have to check out a reference from the book on Google? Are you able to experience silence and solitude and to sit in nature or to simply sit and have a cup of coffee by yourself in a cafe and just be present, or even just, be present at the supermarket and not have to scroll your phone while you're waiting in line or sitting on a bus and looking out of the window instead of actually scrolling, So you want to start to reflect on what are your behaviors and do you have silence and solitude in your life? Do you have any space away from immediate digital distraction? Yeah, so that would be an audit, I suppose, or at least a process of reflecting on how long can I concentrate and how is that impacting the things that truly matter in my life? Does that make sense?
It does. And, reading a book, Daniel, I have to say, I am a big reader, so are my kids. But my life circumstances over the last half a year have had me in the car a lot, and driving is my least favorite thing in the world. So I was thinking, what can I do to make this more enjoyable? Someone suggested audiobooks. Well, it's like the boiled frog. Next thing you know, I'm downloading Audible books and at night lying in bed listening to an Audible book instead of picking up a book. I recently realized that this was messing with my sleep. And so I made a commitment to myself. I'm just saving that for when I'm in the car. I'm turning that off and I'm getting out a book. And it was crazy how tired I got. Just the act of reading the book. I was out of practice from doing something that was such a natural part of my life before I just started using the technology of someone reading a book to me.
I think that's a perfect, beautiful example of everything that I've been talking about. In my TED talk, which is about, how to make space in a world with too much technology or a lot of technology, I talk about the idea that I used to practice the piano. When I was young, my parents asked me to practice the piano for 15 minutes a day. And, 15 minutes a day isn't much. And I probably did it 3 times a week, but they persevered for many years. And so I eventually learned to play the piano. And it became something that was a joy in me. I could move my fingers. I could play Chopin and Mozart without sheet music and then other songs, that were a bit more modern. And I started to I suppose, see the world in a musical way. And I would still say I'm a musical person as a result of that. So that's an example of neuroplasticity where the brain changes based on what you habitually do. So whatever you habitually practice will change your brain and change your worldview and change your experience of the world. Okay, we know this. Okay, this is well documented. I think most of your listeners will know this. But what we haven't made the connection with is that where the average Australian adult is now practicing the internet 9.6 hours a day, the average American is practicing the internet 12 hours a day, especially if they're in office-based jobs. So can you imagine if you were to practice the piano 12 hours a day, how absurdly musical you would become, how it would change your frame of reference for how you see yourself and the world around you, and it would change your habits and practices. So you've given a perfect example of that in situ, where reading a book is a beautiful experience. It's long form, it's slow, it reduces stress. There's lots of research around that, and it increases knowledge, okay? So you transfer that to an audiobook version, which again, I love audiobooks. I think podcasts and audiobooks are fantastic. But that because the technological medium is so different, it's actually an entirely different experience for your brain. And you're teaching your brain to think quickly and to learn audibly rather than to learn long form through slow digested text. And that actually has big consequences. And so you've trained your brain to learn in one particular format, and then eventually you're unlearning to learn in a different format, which actually may be better for different aspects of your life. So that hasn't been a conscious decision in the sense of you didn't say, I'm actually going to deliberately unread my brain. I'm deliberately going to stop learning how to read. But because you took on that digital path, it shaped your perception of the world and therefore has shaped your reality. And the problem is when we do that with everything, we end up with anxiety, with a fractured attention and an inability to concentrate, and this sense that the world is running so fast, but we can't keep up, that we're wide and thin, that our inner life is stretched, and that we have no community. And these things are tremendously problematic if we don't balance the scorecard of the digital brain. So I'm not anti-audiobooks, but I do think we need to be very thoughtful about the choices we make and the consequences of those choices on our neuroplastic change.
And this idea of being intentional is what runs through everything that you talk about, Daniel, right? So I like audiobooks. It helps the drive be more bearable. So, hey, Heather, listen to your audiobook while you're driving, but still have that sacred space, that ritual, that routine before I go to bed of getting to embrace my book and unwind and be less anxious, because I did notice it was messing with my sleep. And I'm like, what is going on? And I thought, well, wait, Dash, you've got your phone in your bed with you, which was a new habit for me. So this idea of being present is also something that a lot of my guests talk about. Mindfulness, having habits that combat stress and overwhelm. How can you be present? And so I think there's a lot of recognition that being present and being intentional about what we do is beneficial. And yet we're immersed in a current social milieu where we're training ourselves to not be present.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that has huge consequences. What I think people don't realize, and I'm a productivity consultant, and so most of my paid work is working with organizations, senior leaders, trying to help them achieve their goals, essentially, to achieve goals individually and as a team. But I think if I think about it in terms of who I imagine your listeners might be, people who are involved in universities, doctoral students, you have to concentrate, right? You have a longer term goal, let's say a 3-year project to finish your research. And that is a self-generated goal in the sense of you need to break that down into next steps, into milestones. You'll need to be self-motivated to actually do a number of hours of concentrated, focused writing or reading or deep work throughout the day. And so essentially, the most important skill that you can learn for your doctorate is what Cal Newport would call deep work, the ability to focus in a deep way, to single task your way through a complex task, to exert cognitive energy to achieve something that is creative and new and novel and important that only a knowledge worker can do. And to do it in a rapid amount of time, meaning you can achieve a lot in a short amount of time because you get in the zone. Okay, so That is basically, I would have said, the primary skill to be a fantastic doctoral student and to achieve your best work. And that is completely the opposite neuroplastic training to scrolling TikTok reels and watching YouTube shorts. It is like literally the polar opposite. And because you have the same brain, if you're watching an hour of YouTube shorts and an hour of TikTok and Instagram reels every day, and then you say, now I need to do 3 hours of concentrated deep work on my doctoral thesis, it's impossible because you've actually trained your brain to be addicted to digital candy. It's like saying I'm going to eat, 10 cloves of garlic and not let it seep out of my pores. So that the point is what you do with your brain and how you train your brain to focus outside of your doctoral work will have massive implications for your ability to concentrate in doctoral work, because you can't just flip your brain on and off and your dopamine receptors to say, now I don't need distraction. Does that make sense? And have you seen that in your students?
It absolutely makes sense. Social media is probably the last place a doctoral student should be. Social media doesn't fit with a long-term goal that requires the deep learning that you were just talking about. And one of the exercises that you suggest someone does is related to this whole philosophy around technology. And what I realized was I needed to take myself off these places, not just for me, because it wasn't consistent with how I wanted technology to be in my life. But if my goal is to help doctoral students finish, it didn't make sense. Once I understood everything that you're talking about right now, that you are training your brain to be operating in a way that's exactly the opposite of what it needs to do to reach this life goal, it didn't make sense. There was no logic. There was no rhyme or reason for me to be on social media. And I cannot tell you this sigh of relief that my mind, body, and soul seemed to experience. It was immediate. I'm still on LinkedIn.
Well, I use LinkedIn all the time. I'm very active on it because that's how I build my business. So I'm not anti-tech. I'm not anti-social media even. Like you said, I'm very much about being deliberate and intentional in how we live and making the space to do that in line with your values. So what I've heard is you've reflected on your relationship and your paradigm of technology, which is what the first half of my book, Spacemaker, is about. You've decided that actually the values that I have, both for myself and for those I'm leading, are no longer in line with scrolling Instagram. And therefore, you're making a value-based, informed decision about how you want to shape your brain, knowing that wherever you go, your brain will be, right? So whatever you're doing with your brain in one area of life is going to carry over into the next. And so therefore, there are lots of consequences. So, and therefore you might choose, I'm going to do LinkedIn because it helps me build my, collegial relationships. And there's no Instagram reels on LinkedIn. It's not quite as an addictive. So again, it's about your values. And when I go back to the question you originally asked, which is about slowing down, being present, and how this relates to the broader picture, because I went more directly into the work realm, I think it's exactly the same. When we really think about what makes our life valuable from a research perspective, and when we just look at our own experiences of life, the things that typically make us happier and that align with most people's values are community and deep relationships with people you love and being present with them. Some type of spiritual pursuit where you're exploring your inner life and experiencing genuine meaning and purpose in your life. Like we're really lacking hope because we're lacking meaning. And deep thought is another one, the ability to know yourself. And the other one is, deep work, to be able to actually achieve your life goals, the things that truly matter that will accelerate both your career, your finances, and just your sense of contribution. And all those realms, career, spirituality, science, relationship, they're all very much impacted negatively if you train your brain to be hyperactive and distracted. And so therefore, is my hour of Instagram scrolling a day, and that would be small, is that more important to me than having an hour with my kids? Do you know what I mean? So it's more about thinking about what's your greater yes. What do you really want to achieve in life, and what does a good life look like for you? And then put technology within that broader vision for life, rather than doing what we're currently doing, which is just habitually starting with technologies that will solve our problems, including AI, and then wondering why our life isn't actually in line with the values which we haven't really thought about in the first place. Do you follow how that works? So it's reversing the order.
Yeah. And everything you say is so logical and so reasonable. And I'm sure every listener is saying that makes perfect sense. And yet I'm still grabbing my phone, right? I'm scrolling. I get sucked down these rabbit holes. Now, I started listening to your podcast in that first season. You bring people through a series of activities to help them refocus. Yes?
Yeah. Well, the whole season, I call it a podcast. I think it's probably more like a pod course. If you listen from episode 1 to 10, and that's all there is, it's not a regular, ongoing podcast, I will teach you how to retrain your brain around 3 key principles. What we do in the course is we start off with introducing a topic and then giving a very simple practical exercise. I think the first one, which you might have done, which is to simply spend 5 minutes in nature without a phone and just paying attention to your surroundings, right? So anyone can do that. I think the second activity that we give is to find a high quality leisure activity that you already enjoy but have neglected because of your digital overuse, and to spend more time doing that. For example, I spent an extra 20 minutes playing guitar where I haven't picked it up for ages. My friend went back to brewing beer. I think the third activity we have is to write down 3 people we care about and we haven't given enough attention to, and in some small way give attention to them this week. But they're just random activities. By the time we hit episode 5, we give you a framework and we pull it all together. And essentially the framework is that if you want to retrain your brain and to live a focused, intentional life, you need 3 things. You actually need a vision for what that life is to be. So we teach you how to discover and have a sense of what your greater why is. So what is the greater yes that would then shape your digital habits? The second part of the framework is you have to reduce your addictive digital input. So curate your digital environment, because the reality is we are addicted to our devices because they're highly addictive in the way they're designed. So if you are actually scrolling Instagram 3 hours a day, or 5 hours a day is the average American teenager spends 5 hours on social media a day, and more than 3 hours a day leads to depression, anxiety, risk factors, which obviously is a contributor to other things. But yeah, basically reduce your digital inputs. And the third one is reorientate your habits, 1 or 2 small habits around things that truly matter to you, whether that be relationships or career or spirituality, whatever they be. You need to re-add in habits in order to retrain your brain to focus on the things that matter. So that's our framework. It's a summary of a 10-part series, but it's obviously a lot more in depth than that in terms of the science and the practices.
And it's 10 episodes.
Yes, 10 episodes with practices in between.
The show notes, how people can get those 10 episodes. Now, people might be wondering, especially people who might be having trouble focusing, are these long episodes or short episodes?
Oh, no, they only go for 5.5 hours each, twice Tim Ferriss. No, we've aimed for half an hour, although there were a few episodes that stretch into 40 minutes. So, but they're not long. And we actually give you some silence in between the episodes, because one of the things about an audible culture is we're absorbing so much information, but we're not spending enough time to process how to apply it. And that's where we come unstuck. So we try to give you some processing time in that half an hour episode as well.
Yeah, I love that, by the way. That was definitely a new experience for me to have the pauses built in.
I was terrified, actually. Well, our podcast producer said that is a bad idea. He said, you're going to lose all your listeners if you put in a minute of silence into the actual podcast. And we're like, well, it's called the Spacemakers, and so we'll give it a go. And I'm very thankful that the analytics show that no one pulled out en masse during those silent spaces. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, because you're giving an opportunity to practice what you're preaching. And if anyone wants to truly take responsibility for their ability to focus, right? They're going to hang out through those 1-minute pauses, use them as you intend for them to be used. So I am so grateful that you pulled that together, because it will be so important, not just for doctoral students, but truly share this episode with anyone you know and love. And I can't wait to get this edited and off to my daughters The research that you talk about is something that is so troubling to not just parents, but to anyone who deals with children. The addictive nature of the phone is impacting the well-being of our youth is a huge global problem. And so everything that you're doing is helping to reverse that. And as a parent and as an educator, I'm grateful.
No, thanks for that. And look, I do want to acknowledge that I've been speaking, with adults in mind in this conversation, and I'm not anti-social media, and I'm certainly not judging you if you're on socials because I use them as well. But when it comes to kids, it is an entirely different game. Jonathan Haid's book, The Anxious Generation, is worth picking up if you're a parent and you'd like to read. Next week, I release my Raising Tech Healthy Humans book as an online course. It comes out worldwide. And so you can get a free mini course at raisinghumans.au, which answers very specific questions like, when should I give my child a smartphone and how to do it safely? How to set screen time limits with my children, and are tablets or television better for my kids' developing brain? How do I model healthy behaviors? That all comes in the free mini course, plus digital contracts and infographics. So if parents are interested in just getting free resources, well, then that could start to set them up with the right types of conversations they need. And they're pretty short, sharp videos. They're designed to be super practical for busy people. So that's raisinghumans.au. The AU is Australia, obviously.
And I'll make sure that link's down below as well. I loved your Raising Tech Healthy Kids. Even though my kids had already launched, I found the information so helpful. And then I passed it on to my family members who have younger kids. I know a lot of my audience does have children. Some of them even have grandchildren. You've got nieces, nephews. The cool thing about Raising Tech Healthy Kids is it gives you an opportunity to model, right? There's like a built-in accountability. If you want to raise a tech healthy kid, you have to be a tech healthy adult.
It's like when you're a manager and you say, you have an opportunity to increase your performance. So we have an opportunity to model better behaviors. I agree with that.
Daniel, thank you so much for coming back. Would you like to wrap up the episode with a favorite quote or some final words of wisdom?
Look, final words of wisdom, whether it be about raising tech healthy humans or making space, the heartbeat is that I think what you give attention to will shape your life. Actually, that is a quote from Winifred Gallagher, at least an almost quote. So what you give attention to will shape your life. And I think that is really profound. What we give our time and focus and energy to literally becomes the texture of the life we live and the quality of that life. And so therefore, let's be very deliberate in what we fill our eyes with and our minds with, what we spend our time on. And not in a negative way. Let's just think about the breadth and depth and wonder of life, the people we love, the causes we truly want to contribute to, the beautiful spiritual life and wonder out there that we can, be part of, and pay attention to the stuff that truly matters. And if you focus on that, then the tech stuff just becomes a side note within the broader vision that you have. So that would be my heartbeat, to live an intentional life and to be thoughtful about what you give attention to.
Beautiful way to end today's episode. Daniel, thank you for being here. And thank you again for that reminder of how important it is to be intentional.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a true joy to connect with you again.
Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Until then, if you're looking for more ways to invite joy in your journey, check out the free resources at expandyourhappy.com. You'll find downloads like an article I wrote titled The Doctoral Journey, 12 Things You Need to Know That They Probably Won't Tell You. You'll also find a PDF that organizes all podcasts by the 7 steps detailed in the Happy Doc Student Handbook, which you can also find on the website. Finally, if you're looking for a Happy Doc Student swag, I've got that too. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel, and if you want to make my day, rate and review so that together we can change the way doctoral education is delivered and experienced. Hey, one more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.